So are we ready to get started?
Yep, over to you, Milfrey.
Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone. Appreciate you being here this afternoon for the virtual open house for the downtown Charleston transit study. Just a quick introductions of our team. I'm Milbury Hurd. I'm with Nelson Nygaard Consulting Associates, and I'm the consultant team project manager. I'm going to ask the folks with CARTA and the COG to just very quickly introduce themselves, starting with Megan Ross.
Hi, I'm Megan Ross. I'm a transit planner with the BCD COG. Sharon.
I'm Sharon Hollis, Principal Transit Planner with BCD COG.
Michelle Emerson, Marketing Communications Manager for BCD COG.
Great. And on the Nelson Nygaard team, I'm going to turn it over real quick to Sam Wright to introduce himself.
Good afternoon, Sam Wright, with Nelson Nygaard, the Deputy Project Manager on the consultant side. Megan?
Hi, everyone. My name is Megan Nicholas. I'm with Nelson Nygaard, and I'm supporting with the first and last mile connections, as well as community engagement. Mike?
Hi, my name is Michael Reeby. I'm a transportation engineer with Nelson Nygaard, and I've been working on the VRT running ways feasibility, so I'll be presenting on that in a few minutes.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. So today, this open house is part of our fourth and final phase of the community outreach. And today we'll start by presenting the proposed transit network concepts for downtown Charleston, and then move on to three important elements of the study related to infrastructure supporting downtown transit. And we'll end with next steps and then open up the webinar for questions and answers. Megan, do you want to cover this slide on how to participate via Zoom?
Yep. So thank you all so much for joining us. We are happy to be sharing these updated concepts with you and look forward to receiving your feedback.
Megan, I'm having a really hard time hearing you, and I think you need to get closer to your microphone.
Thanks, Sharon. Did this work? Great. Thank you all so much for joining us. We look forward to hearing your feedback on these draft concepts. If you have comments or questions that you would like to share with us throughout the presentation, please use the Q&A function in Zoom to submit your questions. It looks like two little speech bubbles and says Q&A. You can click that and submit your questions, which will be submitted to all of the panelists. When we get to the discussion portion at the end, you can also click raise hand to raise your hand, and we can unmute you to verbally share your comments if you'd like. So thank you. And just a note that this meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the project site.
Okay, great. Okay, just real quick to give you an overview of the projects. I know that many of you are probably very familiar with the project, so this is the quick introduction. The purpose of this project is to identify proposed improvements to both local and dash bus routes on the peninsula, and more specifically, to enhance the service itself in terms of frequency of service, reliability, and coverage, look at possible ways to modernize the existing transit infrastructure, and to regain ridership that was lost during the pandemic and build new ridership. Some of the considerations regarding transit supportive infrastructure that we've examined and taken into account include the downtown transit center bus stops, the planned park and ride lot at Mount Pleasant Street, which will replace the former hop lot, the planned Low Country Rapid Transit bus rapid transit service and infrastructure, including the alignment and stations, as well as existing and planned bicycle and pedestrian facilities. Next slide. So this project has been going on for just about a year, and we're getting very close to wrapping it up. We're in the final phase now of community outreach and before we develop the final report. Next slide.
And so now we'll take you through the some of the downtown concepts that we've come up with. As Milbury mentioned, we are sort of towards the end of this study, But we've done a lot of work looking at existing conditions and what going out multiple times to the community before and asking what they'd like to see. So the concepts that you see here are really reflective of a lot of that previous effort of both looking at where transit may be the most beneficial and where people were looking to have transit services serve today and in the future. So here you can see on the left, we have the current network in the peninsula or downtown. And on the right here, you have two maps, both a pre-LCRT and a post-LCRT. LCRT being the Low Country Rapid Transit Line that Milbury had mentioned earlier, where it'll be a rapid BRT service that will be coming into the peninsula. So these different networks are proposed for both before that it comes online and then after that would be in service. So some of the routes tweak just a bit when that BRT service is online or not. So we'll go through a few of the highlights of some of the sort of larger changes of the routes, but we'll have a more complete document with all the route changes online as well. So if you want to look specifically at any one route, but we'll just go over some of the bigger highlighted changes that we've made or have proposed. Route 10 is Rivers Avenue, currently stops at the Visitors Center. It's proposed to extend through MUSC to the West Edge development and the future park and ride lot that will be there. That will be the terminus and actually the route, as you can see in the map on the left, of what LCRT will be doing. So Route 10 is really proposed to extend to follow that same path before the Low Country Rapid Transit line is in service, and then after it's in service to return back to terminating at the Visitor Center. This also includes a little bit of frequency adjustments, particularly to get people used to some of the frequencies that we would expect with LCRT, although not fully at the full rapid transit that will come once the BRT line is in service. For Route 20, we have the King Street meeting route. It is currently a free route in downtown, although not considered a dash route under the current designations. The services here are mostly for frequencies and spans of service, really trying to increase some of the frequency here and then transferring that Route 20 into a dash route so that it can be branded as such, operating fully within downtown and providing more rapid services. For Route 102, the North Neck, we have a few changes for this one. In pre-LCRT, it's really transitioning the end of line around the Gadsden Green homes and MUSC to really serve those areas and connect with where the Route 10 would extend. And then post LCRT, it'd be connecting at that West Edge park and ride facility and ending at the end of the LCRT fully, where transfers could be done with LCRT to get further south or east on the peninsula. In the post LCRT, we also are proposing to serve Rosemont and have that be the northern terminal, and any future alignment to the north, particularly in North Charleston, would be needed to be considered as part of another study that would be looking at potential future services in North Charleston. The 210, which is the College of Charleston or Aquarium Dash route, today mainly serves around the College of Charleston, goes to the Visitor Center, and then out towards the aquarium and the museum out on the east side of downtown. The proposed is to have the service just stay mainly on Calhoun Street to really act as a east-west connection from MUSC to the College of Charleston and all the way out to the Harbor Walk area. This would no longer go to the Visitor Center, but would make multiple connections between other routes that would go to the Visitor Center. The 211, the Meeting Street Dash route, is probably one of the larger changes for sure. Instead of a one-way loop that really goes along King and Meeting Street and through downtown, this one would try to stay on Meeting Street past the Visitor Center, but then extend north to the future Mount Pleasant Park and Ride lot that Milbury mentioned earlier, along Bay and Morrison. And to the south, I'm really heading over to the east, so you still would make that connection if you wanted from the visitor center over towards the aquarium, and then further south towards in the French Corner along East Bay, providing a little bit of a parallel service with what the Route 20 would be on Meeting. And then the 213 is also a sort of larger one-way loop with the 210 picking up part of Calhoun Street. The 213 would be able to operate more bi-directional service, a little bit more intuitive service for people to be able to have a connection from the visitor center a little bit to the north and then west to hit the north side of the MUSC and then connect in with the terminus of the proposed 10 or the future LCRT. So that was sort of a lot of the larger changes that were proposed in some of the maps that you saw earlier. We took all the concepts out, all the proposed changes in terms of alignment changes and frequencies out to the public back in February. We had an online survey open from February 14th to March 14th, which got just over 500 responses that really gave some fine detail on some of the route-specific likes and dislikes as well. We went out and we're in person at multiple bus stops. If you were there, we probably met with you, but talking to riders to see what they thought of some of the routes that went by those stops. So that was on the 21st and 22nd of February. And the next slide will just take us through really what the overall response rate to those route changes are. And as I mentioned before, this is much more in more detail and length in a document that will be soon on the project website. But here's just a quick snapshot of from sort of left to right. You can sort of see the approval rating of some of the route changes. So on the right, you can see some of the changes we made to the Route 20 were some of the highest approved. In the Route 10, particularly in the pre-LCRT. A lot of them were favorable changes overall. And then really it was the Route 10 and maybe the Route 102 in the post-LCRT where we need some either additional looks or additional study for some of the changes, particularly to the north of downtown, where we want to make sure that we're still able to serve the people and for any changes that were shown in these concepts. So on the next slide, you'll see the proposed, some of the spans of frequency changes that went along with those, some of those alignment changes in particular. We heard from the community, both from our stakeholders as well as through the surveys, that there was a need and desire for more service, either later hours or more frequency on the peninsula. So the Route 10, but with its extension, not only is it serving further into the peninsula, but is also looking to have higher frequency, particularly at night, to really running 30 minutes throughout its service span instead of switching to hourly service. The 20 would get bumped up to 20 minutes during the day. So from basically 6 to 6 would be 20-minute service all day versus the 25 and 50 minutes it does now, and then 30 minutes at night. And that sort of its sister route really, and is the 211. It parallels part of the peninsula, would also be operating those same hours all the way till 3 proposed to run till 3 a.m. running at 20 minutes during the day, 30 minutes at night to provide with both those routes 15-minute service up and down the spine of the peninsula at night, so all the way till 3 a.m. To be able to provide that access to the park and ride and pick up some of what used to be done by the Hospitality on Peninsula route or the HOP route. And you can see some of the other changes here as well for some of those other routes we went over. Now, all of this is particularly the extension of the 10 with the frequency and length of route it is, and the really sort of more dramatic increases in frequencies that we're proposing for the 20 and the 211. It means that these service changes aren't cost neutral in terms of what are proposing over existing today. Both in the pre and post LCRT, they do cost more than to operate on an annual basis than today. We're looking at about the $2.25 to $2.5 million more per year to operate those increased frequencies, to operate those extended service hours, and some of the route extensions that we talked about. And now I will go back to Milbury.
Thanks, Sam. Appreciate that. Next slide. So we wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the Downtown Transit Center. Today, I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. There are quite a few stops, really 4 stops, the primary ones being at Mary Street and Meeting Street, and also at the Visitor Center on John Street. But there are also stops, very important ones, on Meeting Street in front of the Visitor Center and Charleston Museum, both sides of the street. And there's also a stop, which is more for folks getting off the bus at the Transit Mall. Of the Carter routes, 13 of the 23 do serve the Downtown Transit Center, and 10 of those end at the Downtown Transit Center. So this is particularly important to the way that the system functions. The Downtown Transit Center also serves as a location for these 10 routes to layover. And layover is the time scheduled at the end of a route before the departure time of the next trip. And the reason that layover is scheduled is for 2 reasons. One is to provide time for the vehicle operator to take a break, and the other is to provide time for the bus to get back on schedule before the next trip departs the transit center. Next slide. Not sure what's going on.
Are you not seeing the next slide when there's the blue dot?
There it goes. There it goes. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so with the downtown concepts, there will be some changes to the Downtown Transit Center. One thing regarding the Marriott Meeting Street stop, I wanted to point out that that particular stop is very constrained today. Its capacity is very limited. And that's partially due to the 3 driveways to get into the parking garage there. Because of that, it can really only efficiently accommodate 2 standard size buses at a time, which is tricky because even though it's a major end of the line location, because it can only accommodate 2 buses, that means that the operators are having to find other locations along the way to lay over before they pull around to the Marriott Meeting stop. The number of the buses in the peak hour and the peak period would increase just slightly post LCRT. So it's okay, it works, but it would not support any frequency improvements beyond what's proposed in this study. The Visitor Center on John Street, it will remain as part of the multi-stop transit center and would serve as a bus stop for the Route 213. But because of the changes that Sam just presented to you, the other dash routes would no longer be stopping at that particular location. Next slide. For the, well, yeah, back one, Megan, please. There you go. For the Visitor Center and Charleston Museum stops that are on Meeting Street, this is where it gets interesting. With the implementation of the LCRT, the existing northbound and southbound bus stops are going to need to be moved a little bit. The reason for that is that there are different platform or bus loading heights for the BRT buses compared to CARTA's existing bus fleet. So that means that the existing bus stops need to shift a bit. So we're recommending, as you can see in the diagram here, that the local bus stops be shifted to just south of Ann Street, which means they'll be on the same block as the LCRT stations. There will be some changes in the number of buses at these at the local bus stops on Meeting Street. There are some fairly significant increases in both directions before the LCRT comes online. Not quite as many after it does. And again, that does not consider any frequency improvements that's beyond what's proposed by this study. Next slide. I mentioned layover, and layover is a big need. Right now, the layover location is really kind of inconsistent. Really what's needed is a 7 or 8 bus lineup. And ideally that would be near restrooms for the operator to take breaks. And preferably it would be at the same location as passenger transfers are taking place. As I mentioned, that is just not feasible at the Mary Street and Meeting Street location because of the garage entrances. So we looked at a number of different potential options. We're not making any specific recommendations at this time, just looking at what might be possible. One thought we had was the transit mall, which you can see in the photo here. The idea would be to reconstruct the transit mall to make it able to accommodate the 7 or 8 bus lineup. The tricky part about the transit mall is if you look at the picture, you can see it's fairly narrow, and really and truly it's not wide enough for buses to pass each other. So that means that it would really need to be widened in order to turn that into a functional layover point. Another side note or important note for those of you that follow the low line plan, this is proposed to be part of the low line, which is a bicycle pedestrian or recreational trail. So that's the transit mall in a nutshell. Another thought we had was the bus shed, which is adjacent to the Charleston Visitor Center. We're wondering if it would be possible to dedicate a lane in the bus shed, because it is certainly long enough to accommodate the bus lineup. And it was also originally constructed as the CARTA passenger transfer location. So it could provide the opportunities to serve as a consolidated location for layovers and also for transfers. And if you're familiar with the system, you may know today that CARTA is using the bus shed for layovers, for some of their layovers now. Without any of those, without those 2 improvements, the other options that we've looked at, not in any detail, but if those 2 don't work out, then we would need to look at removing nearby parking or possibly a travel lane. And with that, I'll turn it over to Megan.
Great. Thank you, Milbury. Can you hear me all right? Okay, great. We will talk a little bit now about first and last mile connections to the new proposed transit system in downtown Charleston. And so we know that every trip on transit begins with either walking or biking to get to the transit stop. And we want to make sure that the locations of future stops are accessible and provide convenient access throughout the peninsula. So to evaluate that, we looked at the existing proposed facilities for pedestrian and bicycle improvements through other plans, identified key gaps for pedestrians within a half mile of a bus stop and for cyclists within 1 mile of a bus stop. And so we looked at where the bus stops may change as we update the transit network over time to the system that Sam described. And so we wanted to see how would access to bus stops change as these routes change. So you can see the map on the left with sort of the pink bubble outline. That is showing the access to existing bus stops today. As I mentioned on the last slide, we typically look at a half mile distance to a bus stop, which is roughly a 10-minute walk for many people. In this case, on the Charleston Peninsula, really the entire peninsula is within a half mile walk, which is great for convenient access to transit. So for a bit more differentiation, what's shown on this map is a 1/4 mile walk to a bus stop, which is about a 5-minute walk. And so you can see the majority of the peninsula falls within that 1/4 mile area today. In the future network, there would be some changes, but not major changes. You can see in the map with the yellow bubble in the middle. The red dots there are stops that would likely be removed because the routes on those streets are suggested to be relocated to nearby more major streets in the future plan. So you can see, really looking towards like the central neighborhoods where there are more narrow streets. Those are the main places where things are being relocated. But for the most part, we're still within about a 5-minute walk of a bus stop from all of those neighborhoods. So you can see there are also some gold colored dots, and those are potential locations for new bus stops to help fill in the gaps and make sure that neighborhoods stay as close as possible to direct access to the bus. The stops would need to be refined, but they represent typical spacing and locations where a bus stop would likely be feasible. So with that in mind, the map on the right shows sort of the difference in potential access today. And you can see most of the peninsula maintains very similar access to bus stops in the future. The one location that sort of stands out is in the top right, near the cemeteries. And so that's a location where we'll take a closer look at improving pedestrian access from that neighborhood. However, it is still within a half-mile or 10-minute walk to bus service. So we looked at ongoing work to date and plans for first and last mile connections on the peninsula through other projects that have been ongoing over the last several years, including Walk Bike BCD, the People Pedal Plan, the Low Country Lowline Plan, and LCRT's Walking and Bicycling Access to Stations memo, as well as their ongoing transit-oriented development plan. And the most similar in terms of areas that we've been looking at is that transit-oriented development, or TOD plan with LCRT. It does cover majority of the recommended changes that we would consider for these routes, and there are a few potential additional changes. So we have some more detailed recommendations on these, but at a high level, we are recommending adding those new bus stops to maintain as short as possible walking distances from all neighborhoods on the peninsula. Helping to facilitate an easy walk to transfers around the visitor center through some of those potential changes that Milbury mentioned in terms of transfer and layover locations. And then really looking to reconcile some of the ongoing plans, particularly recommendations for new bicycling infrastructure on the peninsula to make sure they align with this proposal. One of the key things that will need to be resolved is on a number of streets, there are recommendations for bicycle facilities that require space to accommodate those. And we also would require space to operate the bus on those streets. And in some cases, in order to provide the dedicated bicycle facility that was recommended, it would make the street too narrow for bus operations. So we may need to look at revising the type of facility or maybe moving things over a block for the plans to coincide. We've also recommended several locations for additional sidewalks beyond what has been previously recommended. The majority of those additional recommendations are on East Bay and Morrison Drive, which would help to promote access to the new route for the 211 that Sam described, which serves the east side of the peninsula. And then, of course, in all of the new bus stop locations, confirming sidewalk ramps are ADA accessible and crosswalks are available near the stops in all directions to allow people to access both sides of the street. With that, I'll turn it over to Mike.
Thanks, Megan. So I'm going to be going over alternative that could support future transit infrastructure that complements the currently in design LCRT. So as part of this effort that we were doing as part of this downtown this transit study is that we took a look at the LCRT and all of the history behind all the design iterations that it went through. So the LCRT is a 21 plus mile corridor. We're actually just taking a look at the furthest end of that map on the peninsula over in the lower right hand side. So this is where the BRT runs in the most constrained right of way through the historic downtown. So looking back in all of the past planning efforts and design iterations through concepts up until the point is now where the project is in design, its final design, several iterations occurred. So prior iterations proposed center running reversible lanes and side running reversible lanes, and so those didn't move forward. These were more complex infrastructure requirements, and I'll go over those in a minute here. They did not move forward due to the space required to install large amounts of overhead digital signage with that limited right of way that we're talking about. And so what we were tasked with is looking at, what kind of future proofing can we do in this area where there's constrained right of way, that there was infrastructure, dedicated bus infrastructure proposed, and now there isn't. So right now the design is that the bus is running in mixed lanes, so just as the lanes, curbside lanes that there are today. And so when we were showing graphics of the downtown, the transit center, stops being in those lanes. We're looking at this area specifically because the RTFP in 2018 did propose several expanded bus rapid services that would use the same exact routing as LCRT2. So if you're thinking about LCRT coming online, and then you're thinking about in the future here, these these augmented high priority lines, you could be seeing something like buses coming down this corridor, Meeting Street, for example, in the peninsula every 2 to 3 minutes. There could be a bus coming from a different line or from the LCRT. And so when you get that kind of frequency for buses, it's very, very common for cities to start exploring dedicated lane assignments to improve reliability and just better organize general purpose traffic. When you think about that many buses stopping in the curbside lane, it basically renders that lane useless for general purpose traffic anyways, because there's going to be a bus stopped at its locations, at its stop points all throughout the corridor. So just looking into this a little bit further, this is kind of some technical graphics, and I have a cross section to show as well. So this is a side-by-side of the 2 operational changes to the roadway that achieve this bus priority treatment. So on the left there, you see this was taken from one of the former presentations during the planning process, the dynamic reversible lane. So these would be overhead signage, digital signage that changes the direction based on the time of day. And so you'd have striped lanes that can go one way in one direction during the morning, and then that changes in the afternoon. And what this does is it adds an additional lane for the peak direction to have a bus only lane. And so in the peak direction, the curbside lane would be a bus only lane with right turns allowed. The other difference here is that the left turn pocket, which doesn't exist today on Meeting Street, for example. Meeting Street's a 4-lane road with shared lefts and throughs. So this design, this dynamic reversible lane preserves or creates, a left turn pocket that can approach at each intersection. So gets those left turners out of the through lane and just kind of better organizes traffic. Going back to some of the design decisions that were made where this didn't move forward, because this would require, on a block by block basis, you'd have these overhead signage, directing people where to go, and you'd have to do it frequently because, these lanes just change direction, and so you wouldn't want to have head-on collisions. So there's some safety aspects to that. So we started looking at how to achieve that same dedicated lane operation in the peak direction without this need for large-scale infrastructure. And so we did some peer review of other cities, signed peak hour bus lanes. We started looking at to achieve this same kind of configuration. It's very, very common across larger cities in America. It's also called a business access and transit lane, or a BAT lane. Sometimes you hear it called. It's called that because the right turn curbside lane, the curbside lane is for right turning vehicles, but also bus movement. So you have that dedicated bus lane, and you can achieve it with just simple signage. And so this is what a cross section view looks like, just kind of looking at those 2 different options. The one, the reversible lanes that were explored before, you have that single through lane in the each direction, but you have that reversible left turn pocket. And then on the right, it's basically the signed version of the same thing. So this looks a lot more like what you have out there today, except you're just achieving that bus only lane in the peak direction with signage. So you can kind of see the similarities here between these 2 options. And then we also looked at a comparison of the former dynamic reversible lanes concept with this signage only peak hour bus lanes concept. So we're looking at some qualitative and quantitative metrics. A lot of similarities here, but some of the biggest differences between the alternatives were the cost and physical infrastructure required and upkeep as well. So the dynamic reversible lanes is going to require this overhead digital signage, putting it in by block up to, frequency basis. So you're putting in these signage every block practically. It would also need to be carefully managed for safety so that vehicles are assigned their proper lane, and you have some changeover where the times are changing, where you need to have vehicles clear out and you change those directions. So the signed bus lane requires just signage, with the option of adding some pavement stencils. So that was one of the biggest differences that we saw. The adaptability of both of these concepts are pretty high. Dynamic reversible lanes are basically instantaneous, right? So you can change it whenever you need to. If you need to expand the hours of operation for what the peak direction is. With the laneage, you'd have to change what the signs say. So with the signed bus lanes. So peak hour bus lanes, they are adaptable. In this fact that they can be implemented on a block by block basis. So you can have it, it's better for continuity, but you can have it start and stop and start up again if you need to. If there's certain blocks where there's congestion issues, continuity is better. With the dynamic reversible lanes, this kind of system would need to be operated wholesale, basically throughout an entire segment length. And you can't really start and stop it as needed because you have those risk of head-on collisions. And so lastly, part of our effort did open up the city's traffic model that was provided to us. So it had a great, vast amount of information. And so we looked at things at a high level. We're sorting through the feasibility of potentially putting in signed peak hour bus lanes. So we're looking at the peninsula, Meeting Street and Calhoun Street, which is near the southern terminus where the LCRT is going to go. And we wanted to just try to determine potential locations where this priority infrastructure could go in. And so we are just looking at existing traffic. We did not do any detailed modeling. Like the full LCRT planning study did a significant amount of modeling. And so we did not do detailed modeling, but we're just looking at the volumes and we're looking at the traffic outputs for existing traffic. And we did come up with some thresholds. You have a good grid downtown, and luckily the side streets don't have much traffic. So you kind of already have priorities for signal timing on Meeting Street and Calhoun Street. We were seeing that you can get, basically about 800 vehicles per hour just using a single through lane. And so where along the corridor can we potentially take that curbside lane and make it a bus only and right turn only lane? And so what you see here is a map of those locations. So the biggest potential we saw was in the morning on Meeting Street between Wolf and John. So this is about 4 or 5 blocks where you could potentially get some low-hanging fruit bus priority infrastructure. And then on Calhoun in the morning, westbound direction, starting at King. And then flipping that in the afternoon, a little bit less number of blocks because traffic is higher on Calhoun in the eastbound direction. And then in the northbound direction, you saw from John up to Line Street, you could potentially put in signed peak hour bus lanes without too much impact. North of Line Street, the traffic really did pick up because you get closer to those highway ramp intersections. So we didn't recommend that. But these are just locations where we think would be the best test case, basically. And so I think for next steps, we would recommend doing some additional traffic and bus operations analysis while this idea gets shopped around. This is something you could also implement as pilot study. You could put it in right now. Use the existing bus lines that are traveling along the route to get bus travel time data so you can see what kind of improvements you're getting, and then also monitor the effect of general purpose traffic as you're kind of thinking for the future here where you might have more and more buses using this corridor. And that was it. I think I'll pass it off to Milbury for next steps.
Great. Thank you so much, Mike. Appreciate that. Yes, as I said, we're rounding the bend on finishing up this study. We're in our final phase of public engagement, including the open house that you're participating in. We'll also be having an in-person open house, actually tomorrow evening. It'll be at the Charleston Main Library in Community Room B. We're having a couple of stakeholder meetings Wednesday morning with the hospitality industry and also with the College of Charleston. And then presenting at the CARTA board meeting on Wednesday afternoon. Please do follow us on the project website. We'll be issuing a number of social media posts and getting information posted to the website. Following that, then we'll turn our efforts towards putting out the final report, a draft and then a final. We'll be doing that in next month in July of 2024. And with that, that is the end of our presentation. And so now we'd like to open it up for questions and answers. And it looks like we got one comment already in the chat that Megan has responded to, Megan Ross. Thank you very much. Megan McMullen, are you able to kind of take over at this point for Q&A?
Yes, so we'll keep an eye on, both the Q&A box. So again, you would click that icon that says Q&A and it has the 2 little speaking bubbles, or you can enter your questions in the chat as Sharon did. You can also raise your hand if you would like to speak, and we can click to allow you to talk. So we'll leave it here for now. If you have any questions, and if it's helpful for us to flip back to a particular slide related to your question, we're happy to do that. Okay, I see we have a raised hand from Savannah. You should be allowed to unmute yourself now.
Hey, good afternoon. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you. I have a couple quick questions. I don't want to take up too much time. But one of the things I was hoping to get some clarity on, I know you all talked about the transit center, that being closer to Mary Street and then closer to the visitor center itself. And I was kind of curious, what is the I guess the constraint perhaps for not just dedicating the visitor center bus shed to transit, since that really is the hub of a lot of the routes, and it has the facilities and the amenities that really are more appropriate for transit riders.
Sure, I'll turn that one over to Milbury to discuss.
Sure, Savannah, that is an excellent question. One that is, I'm not sure I've got the clearest answer to your question, but I can tell you that the visitor center is the one that is primarily making use of the bus shed now for their tourist buses. They also rent out the bus shed for evening events. So it's, while CARTA has some access to it, CARTA does not have full access to it.
Okay, and I think it's, I believe, and I could be wrong, but I believe that is owned by the city of Charleston. So it sounds like maybe the negotiation really is between how much the city wants that to be sort of a transit priority location. Is that sort of where you all are headed with that?
Yes, I think that's a fair way to state it.
Yes,
Okay.
Savannah, there's a lot of use of the bus shed for events and for the visitors center, and that is a city-owned facility. So we try to work cooperatively with the city and the visitors center and realize there's competing interests, but that ultimately it is owned by the city.
Okay, thanks, Sharon. Yeah, it just seems like, and I am certainly not the expert on the call here, but it seems like the obvious solution for transit prioritization and just what's already there and the space that you all need. You know, the transit mall, for the reasons you said, is constrained. There's not a bathroom. It's not world class the way that this needs to be as you're rethinking all of this. So, and then one more question, if you all don't mind. Could you explain a little bit more about, there was mention about sort of competing interests between bus and bike infrastructure and negotiating those sort of along the routes. Is there sort of a plan? Where's the discussion going with this?
Yeah, so there have been several previous plans, pull up that slide, that have identified routes for pedestrian and bicycle improvements on the peninsula. Most recently, the transit-oriented development plan for the LCRT, but also things like the People Pedal plan focused closely on the peninsula. And in any location, there's always competition for how you use space. There's a lot of things we want to do and a finite amount of space to do it. In downtown Charleston, that is especially true with the narrow right-of-ways and historic constraints. And so these plans they have great propositions, but they're coming from a different angle. So they were primarily looking at active transportation on the peninsula and identifying routes that would be great for making those connections, trying to have as many parallel connections as possible to create that network. And so in some places, there have been recommendations that would not accommodate the scale of the buses that are currently used to operate CARTA's routes today, the 40-foot buses. So, you know, one example is Rutledge Avenue. A part of that street in a previous plan was recommended to have dedicated bicycle lanes, that would be protected. And so that means there would be, you know, rather than the space right now that's not very clearly defined, they would dedicate space for bicycle lanes, I think, in both directions. So we typically want at least 5 feet for the bicycle lane and at least a 1-foot buffer. Times 2 sides of the streets, that's looking at least 12 feet. And that would have brought the width of the street down to the point where the 2 40-foot buses can't pass, or they might have issues with turn movements at the intersections. And so there's just sort of a next step that needs to happen now that we've settled on, you know, where the routes are, you know, pending feedback from this round of public engagement, to look with a little bit more nuance at, okay, exactly what type of facility is being recommended in these locations. Maybe we can fit a bicycle lane, but we can't fit that vertical protection on this particular street while also accommodating buses. So sort of that next round that needs to happen to think, okay, what's going to be the best for all modes overall? And how do we prioritize different streets for different functions? Which one can be, you know, the really maybe high frequency transit corridor versus the high protection bicycle corridor, that they can work together.
And
does that make sense? Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to add a couple points as well, and to what Megan mentioned in terms of our coordination. I think it's through our existing work, the state of the sort of system deliverable that we produced earlier on this project has a little bit more detail about sort of looking at through those previous plans and identifying those locations of potential conflict. And it's definitely something that we wanted to consider as we were looking at potential service changes, and then making sure that, like Megan just said, as we look towards the recommendations that we can, this plan can adjust, but then maybe these other plans can also adjust to those needs and desires. But we've also been working closely with, and particularly, we have basically a project advisory group that we've been working with that has a lot of different stakeholders, but particularly with multiple members of the city have been there in terms of planners and engineers have been on that advisory group as well. So there are discussions happening there as well in terms of making sure that we're coordinating with each other and making sure that we're not both putting out things that are going to be conflicting in terms of trying to take the same space in this really sort of right-of-way constrained area that Megan mentioned.
I appreciate that. Thank you both for that explanation. I think, using the People Pedal plan as an example, we've already seen where, for example, a cycle track was called for Calhoun Street, which is overrun by the transit plan. And so, knowing what those next steps are for redefining what bicycling on the peninsula looks like, in conversation with transit, I think is a very vital next step, because, People Pedal plan, which was passed by the city in 2018, it's really not being followed. I think we're seeing that with the BCD COG's walk bike plan as well. So there are things on the books that, transit, and I'm not saying it's necessarily bad or good, is sort of prioritizing certain corridors that also happen to be prioritized for biking and walking. And so having another public round of sort of redefining what that looks like, I think is going to be needed. And obviously the city has a big stake in that, but DOT does as well, owning most of the roadways. So I think I just would like to flag that as a potential issue. You also mentioned how the low line will be coming down the transit. I forget what we called it, the transit mall or something. So again, if that is perhaps another reason to not have that as a bus layover area. But also, if we're going to be using Meeting Street and Calhoun as transit priority locations, it is even more reason to have this dedicated for the bus that bikes can share. We obviously are constrained curb to curb, but we need to cut down on the convenience of driving downtown, because that is clearly not working, and transit, biking, and walking should be a priority on the peninsula. So anyway, just wanted to get that on the record. Thank you for letting me take up as much time as I just did.
I appreciate it. Thank you. All right. I see we have another question in the Q&A box from Jeff. The question says, I know this does not apply to this presentation, but I thought I'd ask this anyways. I ride the Express 2 bus, and our bus arrived later than the scheduled time. Since this is a bus that I and others ride regularly, would it be possible that riders can subscribe to something that would give us text updates when dispatch is aware of delays in service? I saw
Yeah.
that, Ross, you were.
Yeah, Megan was actually typing it. Megan, if you want to answer.
Yes. So Jeff, we actually have two ways. You can follow our Carta alerts site through Twitter. Dispatch is in control of that, and they typically will tweet out any delays that they see. Also, are you a transit app user? That particular app will give you updated ETA estimates based upon the GPS of the bus itself that's performing that trip, if you are not already using the transit app.
And the app is probably the best way. Again, as Megan said, they do tweet it out, but just in case they are running kind of busy and they don't get it out as timely, that app is something that is on real-time data. See, you wrote that find the GPS is not very accurate. We can look into that to make sure that they are putting the right information in. Every now and then there may be a little bit of a mix-up between what the bus numbers that are being put in. So if you've been seeing that has not been accurate lately, we can definitely send that to operations and take a little deeper dive into that.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Megan. About 6 more minutes for questions. Feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to speak up or type something in the chat or the Q&A. Any questions about the proposed service changes? I see we have a question in the chat from Ray. Would it make sense to route the 30 on Calhoun Street / Lockwood so that it had direct access to College of Charleston and MUSC? This would also mean more service on the Calhoun Street corridor, better justifying bus lanes on the corridor. Turn this one over to Sam to discuss.
Sure. Yeah. So I know that we had taken a look at sort of how the routes had were accessing the peninsula, and obviously the Route 30, Savannah Highway route comes in sort of to the north along the and utilizes both Spring and Cannon Street. A focus of ours was to still be able to have and utilize sort of the bridge, both those bridges over Ashley River to and still provide some access to the north side of MUSC. It certainly is a possibility that the 30 could be routed how the 31 and 33 are routed today and are proposed to be routed in the future to make access to Calhoun Street. But the particularly with some of the neighborhoods to the north, sort of north of MUSC and west of King Street, there was a desire to maintain some service levels there as well by keeping the 30 running. We did consolidate some of the service onto Spring Street as much as possible to have as much bi-directional service, so the bus sort of operating in the same direction on, or in both directions on the same street, so that we could, any new riders or infrequent users could, it's a little more intuitive for them to have that bus sort of, to be able to see that they're, the bus stop in the opposite direction is across the street from them instead of on a next block over. There was a desire to keep a little bit more access, but it always something in the future, particularly once the LCRT comes online, and if those BRT infrastructure improvements were to come online, then there could be a reevaluation of whether the 30 could also make use of that infrastructure to access the visitor center, and if that would be a better, a little more time savings for people coming from further west.
Thanks, Sam. Okay, and there's another one coming for you in just a second. I see a question in the chat from Joshua.
Sure.
Saying, I need a little help clarifying this slide. What is the difference between current network and pre-LCRT network?
Yes, there are a few changes here. Went over sort of the bigger ones, sort of route by route, but just to talk again, the 10 is being extended, so there's The Tin Rivers Avenue is sort of a darker green color. And there are more maps and maps that you can zoom in on that will be available in a document online. But the Route 10 sort of falls on Calhoun Street through MUSC and to terminate around the west end. The
Maybe
102.
jumping into each specific route, that you could explain a little bit more about what the LCRT is and where it'll go.
Oh, sure. So the LCRT, really our pre-LCRT is network is things that could be done today without having that BRT, that rapid bus service in service today. So these are changes that can be made based on the existing ridership and demand for service over the next 5+ years before LCRT would actually be online. So that's why that pre-LCRT network is sort of that focus of what could be done relatively quickly. Some pretty quick alignment changes, and where we maybe need to move a few stops or change some stop signage. The frequency changes and service spans are a little bit more of what that increase in cost would be, and the extension of the 10.
And to add to that question, the post LCRT, once LCRT comes online, it will be providing a much faster level of service along these corridors. And so we don't need to have a lot of duplication along that corridor. So it's really, how do we connect the routes to those stations and provide that connection to LCRT? And so that we'd be looking at implementing in the 2030 timeframe.
Yeah. And if you are not familiar with the LCRT, love that. So this is something that Mike mentioned when he was talking about the dedicated lanes, but the LCRT is a major project that CARTA and BCC are working on that would connect all the way from the peninsula up north to the Somerville area. And so this would be high frequency bus rapid transit coming through the and on the peninsula, you can see the location a little closer in this dark blue line in post LCRT. That's where it will run on the peninsula in the future, coming down Meeting Street to Calhoun Street and then up through the MFSD area. Does that answer your question, Joshua? All right, well, I see we are right at time. If there are no other questions, I'm just putting up this last slide and I will throw in the chat the project site. If you would like more information about this project, it will be posted to the project website. You'll also get a follow-up email with the link to that, and the recording from this meeting will be posted there, along with what we hear from the in-person meeting tomorrow. We encourage you to stop by if you're in the area for that open house tomorrow at the library at 68 Calhoun Street. Tell your coworkers, friends, family. We'd love to hear from them. Again, this will be an informal event, so it will be staffed from 4 to 7 p.m. at the library, the main library, and you can stop by. Starting 5 o'clock.
I think we were closing it out and saying thanks to everyone for joining us today. Sorry for the forward to sharing this final report when it comes out in July.